bookaholics, and welcome back to a Lord of the Rings reading vlog. A little while back, I dedicated some time to immersing myself in Middle Earth, and I read some things, I watched some things, I played some things, I made some things. So we're going to be talking about all of those throughout this vlog. So I'm going to give you an idea of how the vlog is set up and the content within. I have divided this vlog specifically into 7 segments. That is because I have a segment dedicated to The Hobbit, and I also have a segment dedicated to each of the 6 books that you can find Lord of the Rings split into. Lord of the Rings is either considered 1 book, 3 books, or 6 books, depending on how you want to look at it. So you have the original book that Tolkien wrote, which was 1 book, Lord of the Rings, that within it had 6 parts. The publishers then instead published it as 3 books, which are, as we know them today, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. However, within those books, there are also split into 2 parts, all of which I will be using here. So we have The Ring Sets Out, The Ring Goes South, The Treason of Isengard, The Ring Goes East, The War of the Ring, and The End of the Third Age. Therefore, it will be the 7 sections, but also, equally importantly, if you have seen a Hobbit's daytime routine when it comes to their eating, you'll know that it also happens to fall on 7 meal times. So this is instead of what day or week it is, because it's spread out over multiple weeks and days and etc. Instead of marking it by that, I'm going to divide it into breakfast, second breakfast, elevensies, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper. I hope that you find it an amusing way to divide up the vlog. And in each segment, each of the 7 segments, I'm going to talk about 1 book. I'm also going to talk about something that I have watched and an activity that I've done, be it play a video game, play a board game, or make something. Therefore, featured in this vlog, we have The Hobbit film trilogy, The Lord of the Rings film trilogy, extended editions only, 1977 Hobbit animated movie, and the 1978 animated Lord of the Rings movie, seasons 1 and 2 of The Rings of Power, and The War of the Rohirrim. For video games, we have the Lego Lord of the Rings video game, the Battle for Middle Earth, The Shadow of Mordor, and The Shadow of War. And as for activities, we have Lego, The Lord of the Rings Adventure Book, The Lord of the Rings Risk, and The Lord of the Rings Trivia. Throughout the vlog, I am hoping that I will be able to just chat through some activities, some books, and some things that I have watched in this world that have brought me joy, and sometimes not brought me joy, but mostly brought me joy. Just some vague opinions on them and some overlooks. I am going to talk about spoilers when it comes to the books. The books have been out for a considerable amount of time now, so spoilers for the books and the films, but I'm not going to spoil the video games. I'm not going to spoil The War of the Rohirrim or any of the, at least to my knowledge, more recent additions to this world, be it through game or through film. So let's actually go get into some of these clips, and let's start up with some breakfast. Hey vlog, I have read something and I am here to talk to you about it. So first off, we're going to start with, I've read The Hobbit. Now this is obviously a reread for me. I read this as a young teen, maybe tween, and rereading it was lovely. I really do appreciate the way that Tolkien adapts his writing style depending on his target audience. Nothing about Lord of the Rings in terms of content is actually particularly adult content, but The Hobbit, you can tell, is actually aimed at the younger audience. And this is the book where you can really, really see how Tolkien and C.S. Lewis would have been friends. I think that the way that they influence each other is apparent because the level of whimsy that we have in this one compared to anything else that I've read by Tolkien, I think is a clear view of his kinship and his friendship with C.S. Lewis. I do really think that this one is an absolutely lovely story, and the way it's told, although maybe a little bit more complex than we would usually read for middle grade or younger YA now, still has a really beautiful style and storytelling technique that I think would still resonate really well with younger audiences. I have always enjoyed the idea that the original Hobbit didn't link anywhere near as much with The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien actually rewrote it. I would love to actually be able to get my hands on and read one of the original versions of this before it got changed so that it would tie in with Lord of the Rings. So if any of you actually know where I could potentially read that, I'd really appreciate it. But the edition that I have is also really lovely. It has in the front here a little note that says, Spring Term 1999, P5 pupils organised a sponsored read. This book was bought with the money they raised, which I think is lovely. And this is the story of Bilbo Baggins, who lives in the Shire. He lives a very quiet and organised life in his lovely home at Bag End until one day he is visited by a wizard known as Gandalf, who has solicited his help with a group of dwarves needing to sneak into their mountain cave home so that they can reclaim their home as it has currently been taken over by the dragon Smaug. I really did appreciate the way that this story panned out, the level of action to whimsy to character development. I don't think that any of the dwarves, aside from a couple, are hugely fleshed out, but I just feel like the band of merry men vibe worked really well, and I don't think it needed further development. So for the most part, I actually had such a beautiful time reading this. It is one that I would potentially either recommend to my kids or even read to my kids, and I can understand how this book then spiraled into becoming the entire epic saga that is the world of Middle-earth. I cannot, however, say the same for the films. I am going to talk about the entire trilogy of films here of The Hobbit simply because I am not the biggest fan, and I know a lot of people are, so I just didn't really want to yuck someone's yum for too long, so instead dividing it into 3 segments and just talking about the 3. Now, with The Hobbit trilogy of films, I am actually always surprised to think that they are Peter Jackson's works. Peter Jackson is the director of the Lord of the Rings film trilogy as well, and I definitely find that he himself had lost the magic that he had made in the other films. I'll talk about those films later. But I think one of the things for me with The Hobbit, it's not just the CGI. I know that kind of kills the soul a little bit, but it's not just the CGI. It's the pacing, it's the character work. If you compare the two, it just doesn't hold up. So look at it as an isolated trilogy. If I were to not compare it to Lord of the Rings, I still am not the biggest fan of these films. The first film I think was really quaint, a cute fantasy film. I liked it. The second film felt almost entirely immaterial until the end. We could have just stretched the second film another 20 minutes and then completely erased the third film, because the third film was just even more meandering to get to the point. I don't want needless meandering, especially when it's not developing characters, it's not contributing to the plot. It was just there, and it was such a shame because I really wanted there to be more stuff in this world, and it just didn't pan out, sadly. But I understand why people enjoy it. The bits of character work that we do get are really fun. Obviously the acting is top tier. I'm never questioning any of those actors' acting skills. If all you're wanting is to revisit Middle-earth, it's a good nostalgia ride. But if you're actually wanting it to stand on its own and be its own story as a trilogy, I just don't think it holds up, sadly. We have also the Lord of the Rings trivia game. This one is one that we actually bought back when I lived in the UK in maybe maybe 2013. We bought it in Camden Market, and it online is valued at around £50, and we bought it for £5. It is pretty much exactly what it says. It is a trivia game, and you need to answer questions based on where you are. So the question cards on the back have symbols, and you need to pass each part, you need to complete the symbols to move along. And there's a dice, and the questions are hard. They don't mess around. Some of them not so bad, and some of them are relating to the film, some of them are relating to other resources, but some of them are just, what is the elven name for this elf that you see mentioned one time? If you're a hardcore Tolkien fan, I'd highly recommend checking it out because it doesn't pull its punches. And I enjoyed that. I really did appreciate that they actually bothered to make it complicated and it wasn't just, oh, which actor played Aragorn? I am not quite so hardcore a fan that I know each elves are generally called in the common tongue versus their like actual elven name. The only one I can think of that I know is Celeborn, who is, because, and I remember his name because his name is Telepono, but it's spelled teleporno. I'm an adult. But yeah, I really did appreciate that game because it did try and push your knowledge on the world of Tolkien outside of just the films and outside of the things that everyone remembers in the books, you know, like where is Eowyn from? We've got more activities planned, more books to read, and more things to watch. Hey vlog, I am here checking in again because I have in fact finished the first part of Lord of the Rings, which is the Fellowship of the Ring Book 1, The Ring Sets Out. In this story we have of course followed Bilbo's nephew Frodo, who after Bilbo's 111th birthday is left Bilbo's ring, which we saw of course in The Hobbit, and now Frodo has to go set out to go and destroy the ring. So they set out initially to go try and get the ring to Rivendell so that the ring can potentially be protected there or destroyed there. The initial consensus not being that Frodo is supposed to take the ring all the way to Mordor. He just needs to get it out of the Shire and to somewhere that is safer so that then other more qualified people can deal with it. Frodo is of course accompanied by Samwise Gamgee, who is his gardener and close friend, his cousin Peregrine Took, Pippin's cousin on the other side of the family, and best friend Meriadoc Brandybuck. In this one, it is probably the most wholesome installment of the Lord of the Rings books, at least from what I remember. It's a fantastic transitional book, I think, between The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, because obviously as the series goes on, there are darker themes, there are wars, there are much more conflicts, and while the Black Riders do present an element of fear, of almost horror in this first book, the way that it unfolds is still relatively wholesome. I think that it's done in a really interesting way. I think that us transitioning from this middle grade book into this book that's definitely going to discuss much more in-depth themes, the way that the world building is expanding. The tonal shift that we have is also really gentle. We go from like the middle grade, the Hobbit tone at the beginning of this. I mean, it's much more descriptive and much flowerier. So like a younger audience would potentially not necessarily have the attention span for it yet. But you still have the beauty and the serenity that you get of the Shire, only for that to then transition into what is basically the actual Lord of the Rings story. We do get a prologue at the start. It's a very lengthy one, giving you a history of the world, and then you settle into the Shire. The way the Shire is described, nothing is as beautiful as the way Tolkien describes the Shire. And if you've seen the films, you will know that the Shire in the films is absolutely beautiful. But just something about the way Tolkien immerses you in the feel of it, the sound, the smell, everything just feels so intensely wonderful. And you can tell that this story is teaching you how and who and what lifestyle to idealize. And you can get that from the very sense of just what he decides to prioritize in Hobbiton, in the Shire. All of that then is completely emphasized here and woven in a way that you know the kind of lifestyle that Tolkien believes we as humans deserve. And it's beautiful and I love it. Now, there are a few things in here that are slightly different to the book. For example, Arwen's presence and also some of the interactions that we get. But for the most part, I really do think that the films did a really good job of adapting this. Of course, we also get Tom Bombadil, which you don't get in the films, of course. So there are bits in this one that I think this is probably the one that is cut the most almost out of the film, because there is so much gentility about this that wouldn't really suit the more action-packed nature of the films. So obviously we don't have Tom Bombadil. We don't have a 17-year gap in between when Gandalf gives Frodo the ring and when they set out from the Shire. So there are other things in here that we don't necessarily see. It's just nice to get the extra stuff in the books. So while this one is one of, I think, the chunkier of the books that I've got split up this way, it's definitely the one that I think features the least in the film, which is interesting. Talking of films though, before I actually talk about the Fellowship of the Ring film, which I will watch once I have read the entirety of Fellowship of the Ring, I have watched the animated Lord of the Rings film, which came out in 1978. There is also a Hobbit one that came out in 1977, and these films are fascinating. The Hobbit one is a nice short one. The animation style is really quirky. Kind of want us to bring back this animation style. It's very bizarre. But the Lord of the Rings one, the one I've watched, is condensing the entire Lord of the Rings into one film, which is bizarre to me. It was a wild ride watching it. The animation style for this one, very different to the animation style of The Hobbit, which came out in 1977. The animation style in this one is also very peculiar, very unique. I appreciated it, but it was an odd one. The things that they decided to leave in and take out and what they prioritized was fantastic. I had a great time with them, but they are very strange. The voiceover acting is also, I guess it's based on the recording studios they had at the time, but it's also very almost ethereal. I don't know if that's deliberate, but all of the voices have this very odd quality to them that again might be like a production thing due to the time period, or might be deliberate, but either way it worked really well. So I had a good time with those. They're very creepy almost, but very good. And as for activities, because I did say I would do a what I've read, what I've watched, and what I've done for each clip, I have played the Lord of the Rings adventure book. I bought this for my husband on our anniversary as something we could do together, and I really enjoyed this. Literally, it is a book and each page is a section of the game. So first you have to get the hobbits out of the Shire and past the Black Riders. Then we've got the Council of Elrond. We've got the Mines of Moria. We've got when the Fellowship splits up, Fangorn Forest, Battle of Helm's Deep, Shelob's Lair, and the final battle at the Black Gate. It's literally going through the story, but each page is a board game. And I had loads of fun with it. The first time we played it took us 3 hours to complete. Since then, we've played it a couple more times and we have gotten a little bit faster at it. But it was fun. It's a complicated game because literally you can fail the chapter and then you have to restart it. And if you fail the chapter twice, you have to restart the whole board. We haven't failed a chapter twice, thankfully, but it's intense, you know, it's quite an intense game. And we had a load of fun with it, but you do need your brain power because you need to really strategize to make sure that you can maximize on it, because each chapter is almost timed, not timed as in like clock timed, but there's a limit to the amount of moves that you can make and stuff, which makes for very complicated but very exciting gameplay. I've watched something, I've read something, and I have played something. Hopefully this segment has, made you want to either maybe pick up the books for the first time or maybe branch out into other materials. Either way, I'm living my best life. Hey vlog, it is time for me to check in again because I have now finished the entirety of the Fellowship of the Ring. I have read the second book, which is The Ring Goes South. We are starting at the Council of Rivendell and we proceed all the way through to the end of this first book, which ends with Frodo separating from the rest of the Fellowship. We have so many things happening in here. First of all is where we actually encounter several of our characters. Obviously, we have already met Aragorn in the form of Strider. We've of course met the Hobbit and Gandalf, but aside from that we haven't actually met any of the other members of the Fellowship, which means that in this one we are introduced to Legolas, Gimli and Boromir. And we have this being the first encounter that we have of discussions around the politics of the world, including the fact that, for example, elves and dwarves do not get on, the fact that Gondor is in disarray. One of the things that I always found interesting is that no one was sent from Rohan. Like, obviously Elrond would have sent word that the ring has been found, and obviously, I know that Grima Wormtongue has his claws in Theoden because I know what happens after this book. I assumed that someone would have been sent, and in my head, I don't know who would have actually come because Eomer wouldn't have needed to be there because at this point, Theoden's son is still alive. So Theoden would have still been the one leading the Rohirrim, which means that I imagine it would have been Eomer that would have been sent because Theoden definitely would have seen the need to stay, especially seeing the way his father is and the way that the orcs are becoming more and more prevalent in his land. He wouldn't just want to leave, but knowing it's a very important quest, he probably would have sent Eomer. And I wonder then what that would have meant for Rohan following Phaedron's death if Eomer weren't there. So many things that I have somewhat pondered about this council, but getting back onto what actually does happen in the book. And we have some very interesting discussions around the politics of this world and also the way that the ring works, the way that people will want to use the ring, and the fact that the only one that seems to genuinely be enticed by the power of the ring being the man. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh, Aragorn was resilient to it. Aragorn is part elf, like he does have elven ancestors. So as much as it can just be Aragorn is amazing, and it genuinely probably is, you do need to factor in that he has slightly diluted humanness to him as well. More things to it. I believe he also has Númenórean blood in him, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember. But the fact that it only corrupts Boromir, and the fact that it uses his fear and his loyalty to his kin as the thing that drives him to want this ring is so important. It's so important, and people don't talk about it. It's like talking about the weakness of men. Boromir is not weak for the power himself. He is weak for a power he believes will help his people. And that is the thing. It's that he wants a quicker, more effective resolution to the conflict that his people have been enduring while everyone else has been off in their caves and their forests and the Shire and haven't been confronted with the reality of this world. Even Aragorn has been neglecting his own kingdom and his own people. It's important. It's important to talk about because Boromir is kind of always painted in this questionable light. And it's not on, I don't know if I am feeling a certain way, but this man has been confronting all of the horrors that everyone else is just talking about. It is literally how war works. You have politicians and generals that are not on the battlefield doing all of the talking about what needs to be done and what treaties need to be signed. And then you have the soldiers that are like, I want people to stop dying. And that's what's important. Boromir has seen people he loves, people he cares about, his own kingdom dying. And everyone else has been up north in safer spaces. And they're like, no, we're not going to give you the power. I understand his frustration. And even then, he understands. He understands this ring, even though a more immediate resolution would be to try and use the power of the ring because he doesn't understand the ring. He goes with it. He's like, okay, I will trust that you guys who have never helped me have my best interest in heart and are telling me that this power would corrupt me and therefore I should destroy it. He is going purely on faith. And bearing in mind that he is from the kingdom of Isildur, the person who vanquished Sauron the first time, the person who, yes, was potentially corrupted by the ring, but I imagine the way that the life of Isildur is told to people of Gondor will be much more hero-like. Isildur will be the King Arthur of Gondor. So then being like, oh yeah, your dude, like he was corrupted by this ring too. That would suck too. So I don't know. Apparently me talking about Fellowship of the Ring is just a justice for Boromir. I can say the same for the films. I think the films did a beautiful job. This first movie is gorgeous. Like just the cinematography of it is absolutely stunning. It's got to be one of the prettiest films I've ever seen. I love how horrifying and how scary the Dark Riders feel. Like, it's not a horror film, it's not a scary film, but the presence, the ominousness, the darkness, the way the hoods are, like everything about that is so creepy. It's so well done. Obviously, we have depictions of the light versus the dark, this dark, ominous presence of the Riders versus the beauty of the Shire, the type of music that is used. It's stunning. And then obviously we then go into a more realistic look. So once we leave Rivendell, so we've got the beauty versus the darkness, but then we have a bit more raw reality. We have people just needing to traverse this landscape, trying to get through Middle Earth however possible, including through the mines of Moria and the dangers that presents, these forests that are riddled with orcs, and then obviously we have the death of both Gandalf and of Boromir. And I think that it's handled in a really raw way. I really did appreciate it. I did appreciate the themes that come with this book, as well as the way that the world is depicted being brought to life in this film in a way that feels very apt as a movie. I think if you watch those films, you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, that's definitely from a book. It's handled so well. And then for the final thing, my husband has been playing Battle for Middle Earth, which is I can't remember the style of game that it's called, but it's like where you look down and it's like Civilization or Age of Mythology, where you need to get resources and you need to battle it out. And I've been watching him play, and it's been absolutely fascinating. And it's like, wow, that is more entertaining than the Battle of Five Armies section of The Hobbit. Just watching him play. But I've been, so the activity, I haven't actually been playing because I'm not a PC girly. I don't have the hand-to-eye coordination for PC gaming, but I've been absolutely fascinated watching him play and see the way that he plays, because it does feel like you can be part of Middle Earth and build up your own corner of Middle Earth, and I've been really enjoying that. So while I haven't really been doing many activities over the last couple of days that are Lord of the Rings centric, I definitely have been watching him, and the whole Lord of the Rings immersion is just going super, super well. Hey vlog, checking in again, and I am here today to chat about the Lord of the Rings Two Towers book 3, The Treason of Isengard. So this one is the first book out of the Two Towers books. And this one is very interesting because the way that the Two Towers is in the film versus how it is in the book is very different, because in the film we do have it where it's done chronologically. So you kind of see both what's happening with Frodo and Sam and what's happening with the rest of the Fellowship in tandem, which is not the case in the books. In the books, we see mostly Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. So they send off Boromir and then they go out to seek Merry and Pippin. We do see Merry and Pippin within the captivity of the orcs and then within Fangorn Forest, and then them taking down Isengard. In the meantime, we see the other three getting behind Rohan to try and bring Rohan into the fold. So it's been a fascinating story because in the films, I actually am not fussed about watching the Frodo and Sam sections, and this is my favorite bit. And yet in the books felt like a phantom limb. It's like, oh, there should be a Frodo and Sam scene here and there isn't one. So that was fascinating. I came into this fandom through the films, not through the books. So the films are more ingrained in my brain than the books are. But I had such a wonderful time seeing all of this back to back because it feels like it unfolds in a completely different way and it completely changes the flow of it, which I thought was really, really well handled. Two of my favorite characters are introduced in this book. I have three favorite characters in this series, and two of whom are introduced in this book, and the third of whom will be introduced in the next half of Two Towers. So we have Eowyn and Éomer introduced in here. Obviously, I appreciate that Eowyn does get less of a prevalent role in the books than she does in the film. Actually, not by much. Like, the amount of people are like, oh, thank God that the film's really expanded on Arwen and Eowyn, and it's like, I don't know, give him like 2 more scenes. It's not that much. But I did really appreciate that. I do like Éomer. I really love the way that he is in the books as well. He is a bit more brutish. He's kind of like an interesting parallel to Boromir. I do find that Éomer and Boromir have a lot of overlap, and I think that's fascinating to me because obviously Boromir was part of the Fellowship, and it would have been very interesting to see how Éomer would have fared. I think I mentioned this already when I was talking about the previous book. It would have been interesting to see how Éomer would have fared as part of the Fellowship and what resistance or not he would have to the ring, because obviously Éomer at no point is exposed to the ring. But he has a lot of overlap with Boromir. He is someone who has been fighting orcs and watching people he loves and cares about die, and he's on the front lines, and he has a king who is not doing enough, and he's surrounded by other nations who are not doing enough, and it's fascinating to see. And all of the while he's also having to deal with the contention within the court. So I'm really liking that. We've got the battle for Helm's Deep in here, which I love, and good old here comes the cavalry moment at the end there, and we are reuniting the rest of the Fellowship aside from Frodo and Sam. So we reunite Merry and Pippin with Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. A really good, really well paced book. I think that the pacing in this one is absolutely top tier. I loved all of the action scenes. I think that Tolkien's action scenes work quite well for me because they're not too action heavy. It's more about how the characters are faring within those moments, and I think that that was really well executed. I'm excited to continue my journey with this, especially because of how much I love Two Towers. So seeing the other half of the story is going to be great. As to what I've watched, I will talk about the film for the Two Towers once I've finished the whole of Two Towers. So once I've finished the second half, I will, because we've got Helm's Deep in this book, I will talk about the War of the Rohirrim, which we went and watched on our anniversary. The War of the Rohirrim, I have no footage, obviously, for War of the Rohirrim. I'm not going to film in the cinema. That would be super rude. I mean, I inserted a B-roll of me being at the cinema, so you'll just have to believe that that was to watch War of the Rohirrim. Also, there was no like posters and stuff that you could like take photos with, which was very annoying. So you'll just have to believe that that cinema clip is me at War of the Rohirrim. We really enjoyed it. Now, it's one of those, if I really sat down and wanted to, I could pick it apart. Plenty of things that were kind of wrong with it. There were plenty of things that potentially could have been handled better. The protagonist is very Tolkien female, but given a bit more protagonism. But for the most part, I actually enjoyed it. Like, it was a good film. Like, it's a solid, like, 3.5 kind of film. Engaging. The animation was interesting. It was nice to see more of Rohan. It was great to get, like, the history going there. Again, having a female protagonist was awesome. There were lots of things that I liked, and I think it was a well done film. If you're gonna go in comparing it to like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, then you're probably not gonna have the best time. If you're going in being like, this is a fun animated movie that is set in the world of the Lord of the Rings, then you'll have a good time. I think that the villain was almost like he was a typical cartoon villain. And I think that suits Tolkien. You know, Tolkien does do mwahaha evil. So I think that it kind of suited in a way. And the conversations around war and people's roles within combat, the fact that we have this female protagonist within this conflict was fascinating. So there were lots of things to like. Yes, I could sit here and pick it apart, and I genuinely, there are things that I'm like, that definitely could have been done better. For the most part, it was an enjoyable film, and that was what I really wanted to get out of it. And with the experiences that I have been having with other media within this world, I actually just was glad to be enjoying my time with it. And then as to the activity for this section, we're going to talk about Lord of the Rings Risk. This one I literally bought because I couldn't resist owning a board that looks like this. That's my main reason for buying this. I'm not a huge Risk fan. I fell in love with the fact that there's a Lord of the Rings one, and especially that it's got a board that is Middle Earth. So I really enjoy playing it, but because I enjoy getting the board out. It's an interesting one. It's fun. It made my kids want to play the board game as well, just because the characters actually look familiar instead of it just being like, you know, France, England, Russia, etc. It doesn't do anything hugely new. The only element that I think adds to the Lord of the Rings segment of it, you have got like a track for the ring to go on, where the ring needs to go from the Shire down to Mordor, and it's kind of like then the amount of turns that you get will depend on how quickly the ring gets to Mordor. The winner will be determined by once the ring is at Mordor, who has won, if neither party has won before that. So it does add another element of how to win and how to lose. Like it might be about like defending and retaining instead of gaining, because once the ring reaches Mordor, whoever wins. But yeah, also having the good versus the evil teams. So on the bad guys side, you have a cave troll, just your good old standard orc, and a black rider. And then on the goodies side, you have your elven archers, riders of Rohan, and eagles. I like it. It's a game that I already know and just happens to have a Lord of the Rings element. I mean, I would do that anyway. Like I would buy Lord of the Rings Monopoly if I happen to see it in a, you know, if it doesn't cost 50 quid for exactly the same game. So I enjoy those elements. I enjoy just those extra added touches of Lord of the Ringsness to an existing game that I previously was unfussed about owning and then now have a good time with. That's it for this segment. That's something I've read, something I've watched, and something I've done. Hopefully I will get to the second half of this soon and I can update you on the completed version of the Two Towers. Hey vlog, I've read another book, so it's time to check in. I have now read The Lord of the Rings, Two Towers Part 2, the title being The Ring Goes East. Now, what is interesting to me about the way Two Towers works, I already said this in my previous update, that we are not following the characters in a chronological order, we are following the two different groupings of characters. So what we had in the first half of the book is when we are following the rest of the fellowship, as it were, and then in this second one it's when we are following what is happening specifically with Frodo and Sam. Now within the book, I actually do think that the relationship between Frodo and Sam is so much healthier, and I also think that the inclusion of Gollum is done in an interesting way. It definitely delves further into the psychology of the characters. You can definitely see that Frodo doesn't hate hate Gollum because he is afraid of becoming Gollum. Sam doesn't see that because Sam doesn't see how him hating Gollum makes Frodo feel like Sam would hate Frodo if the ring took hold. But the thing is that Sam can't fathom that Frodo would ever think that Sam could think badly of him. And that's really important. And I really do think that the way that that is presented, like it's never said, at no point does anyone actually say any of this, but the way it's presented feels very authentic, and you can tell and you can see that this is how they're feeling. And obviously also having, I imagine, tackled the likes of potentially PTSD and depression, Tolkien himself having been both in World War I and having survived World War II, I suspect the depiction of the way that Frodo is feeling, the almost numbness that he has at times from personal experience, either from himself or what he has witnessed in people he knows and loves. Like his son was in World War II, and he's witnessed a lot of what war and devastation can cause, having the weight of the world on your shoulders. So I do really appreciate the depiction of Frodo in here, and I think it is very, very emotional compared to what you would usually see from classic fantasy. And I think you have to look for it. I don't think that it's just overtly on page like, here are feelings, but just the way that it is depicted, the way the characters are shown, their responses, their facial expressions, their hesitations, excitements and enticements, all of that amounts to what is, at least to me, an interesting depiction of numbness, of the emotion, of depression, of PTSD, of having to deal with the horrors of the world. And I really like that we're never told how they're feeling. We are shown. It comes across in a really fascinating way. I think that the way that Sam talks about Gollum more as a protection of Frodo than it is of his disdain for Gollum, which I don't get in the film. I do feel like Sam just hates Gollum, that he's like creeped out by Gollum and hates Gollum. And it's not that he's wrong in the film, it's just that I think that there's a little bit more nuance to it in the book, due to, I imagine, the amount of time that Tolkien has to talk about these things versus the amount of time that we have on screen, because they're already very long films. So a fantastic addition, and I am glad to have continued. I have also, of course, watched the Two Towers film, and this one is actually my favorite personally. I love Rohan. I know that Gondor is the be all and end all, but I love Rohan. Eowyn is one of my favorite characters from classic literature. Yes, I know she's not in it in the books as much as she is in the movies, but I love her. And I actually really love Eomer. Like, movie Eomer is, I mean, how much of that is that it's Carl Urban? None of it, because the first thing I ever saw Carl Urban in was as Eomer. So I loved Eomer before I loved Carl Urban. I just happened to love both. In this one, we get the inclusion of three of my favorite characters. We get the introduction of Eomer, we get the introduction of Eowyn, and we get the introduction of Faramir, who I didn't talk about in the book, which was very stupid of me. But Faramir, from book to movie, I think he is probably one of my favorite adaptations. I think Faramir and Aragorn are the ones that from page to film are the most accurate, almost in a way. I think Eomer is a little bit more brutish in the books than he is in the film. And I think that, like I said, like Sam, like I prefer movie Sam in terms of on-screen, like how I feel emotionally connected. I just think that some of the interpersonal relationships are potentially handled better in the book when it comes to Sam. But Faramir, one of my favorite characters. So many of my favorite characters are introduced in that second film. Not that I don't love like Aragorn, and obviously the friendship between Legolas and Gimli is fantastic in the movies, not taking away from that, but I feel like even that is expanded upon in the second one. Like that is where we get the, starting to count how many orcs they fell, and that it still only counts as one, and all of that. Yeah, I absolutely love these films. I think that they are really brings to life Middle Earth, is really respectful to Middle Earth, but also allows for the level of entertainment that I think we seek in cinema. I think anyone who is like really Puritan about, well, in the books it's this, now they've just turned it into an action movie, and it's like, one, no, they haven't. It's one of the most sensitive movies, especially with an almost entirely male cast. It's one of the most sensitive
sensitive movies I've seen. Look at the friendship between Frodo and Sam. Look at the way that Aragorn treats everyone. The tenderness at the end of the first movie between Boromir and Aragorn, like, it is so gentle, even though it's got all of these battle scenes, and that is super important to depict on screen. So while I personally feel like there are things that are better in the book and there are things that are better in the movies, and I genuinely do think there are things that are better in the movies, I do think that it's a fantastic adaptation, not because it is so obnoxiously faithful, it's a visual representation of the book, but because it took the core, the soul of the books, and has made it into a film. And I think that shines the biggest light in Two Towers, because Frodo and Sam, the way they are depicted, the fact that it's interspersed, so you're seeing kind of it all in chronological order instead of we're seeing everything everyone else is doing and then everything Frodo and Sam are doing, I think works better for attention retention. So while I think it worked well in the books, I think if the film had been like this, if the film had been, we're going to see Rohan, we're going to see Helm's Deep over here, and then at the second half of the film is just Frodo and Sam walking, it would be a very boring film. So I think that it's handled well as an adaptation to a different media. And I think it's really important to talk about that, because sometimes we're like, well, you know, they completely change the plot of a film because of a book for the film, and that sucks. They haven't changed anything of this story. They've cut bits, they've enhanced bits, they've prolonged bits, they've changed the order of bits, but it's still very much the same story with exactly the same soul. And that is how I feel. But obviously I am someone who came into this world through the movies, so my first love was the movies. It feels potentially a bit different, but I think that in Two Towers, it is really where we see that Peter Jackson's artistic skills come into the fray just as much as Tolkien's. And the last bit of media, so what have I been doing? We have been playing Shadow of Mordor. Shadow of Mordor is set during the kind of dark ages almost of this world. So it's like the rise of Sauron again, but before the ring is destroyed. And we are following Talion, who is a ranger, and we're following him after his wife and son are murdered, and then so is he, but he is brought back to life by the spirit of Celebrimbor, who was the man who created the rings. It is how Talion is going to go and try and protect the peoples of Middle-earth from the rising threat of the orcs. It's a very interesting story because there's a lot more grey morality than you would see in pretty much any other Tolkien content that I have seen. So I really enjoyed that, and I think that it was done in a way that created a compelling story, but we're not following any of the characters that we know, so it's not corrupting any of the existing arcs. I mean, obviously, you get Celebrimbor. All of the other arcs of characters that we are accustomed to are not tampered with, but we still get to spend time in Middle-earth, we still get to see the orcs. One of my favourite gameplay elements of this game is that the enemies that you combat, if they survive encounter with you, they will remember you. So then if they level up later, they will have a vendetta against you, which is really cool. You can also convert orcs to your side, so you can like put like a magic handprint on their head, and they can ally themselves with you, and therefore the idea is to like get as many of your orcs in positions of power as possible to like destabilize the orc system, which is also very cool. So yeah, I had a great time with this one. I really like the gameplay element that this one has, so hopefully I can continue to play a sequel. Talk to you about that a little bit later in the week/month.
Hey vlog, checking in again because I have finished The Return of the King Part 2, War of the Ring. And this one obviously is where we first start out The Return of the King. And this is one of the more action-packed installments. In this one, we start out with the ride to Minas Tirith, which is between Pippin and Gandalf, and then obviously the battle in Minas Tirith as well, including the Rohirrim joining the fray and the kind of unification of men, mostly through the endeavors of Aragorn. We're also then following on from there, including the battle of the fields of Pelennor, and then finally the arrival at the Black Gate. So we have got a lot of the big kind of iconic moments that we see in the film all happening in this one, us ending with the Black Gate and the conversation between them at the Black Gate and Aragorn wanting to push forward, and the way that the mouth of Sauron behaves and the conversations that had. Interestingly, the mouth of Sauron, like the conversation that is had there, is much more political rivalry. It's less this cruel force. Like, he does look cruel and he is obviously the voice of Sauron, but it's more like a diplomatic rivalry, the way they talk, the way it's like, I don't want your kind on my territory, well, your kind keep trespassing onto my territory, and the conversations that come with that. So that was fascinating. And then obviously we also have Aragorn actually attempting to step into his shoes and become king. So I am really excited to finish up this series, and because we get less Frodo in here, because once again we don't really get Frodo in here, so everything that happens with Frodo from the third film is all going to happen in the second half. So I'm really excited for that, because I know that it plays out slightly differently and that the relationship between Frodo and Sam is considerably healthier than it is in the film at this point. Not that it's a criticism of the film, more just that because of the way that it plays out, it makes more sense for their friendship in my mind in the book. But obviously it was to create like a tension and to kind of speed up the process of them getting separated, etc. So it makes sense in the film, but I prefer how it's done in the book. So I'm looking forward to reading that when I actually get to it. Obviously very battle heavy. War of the Ring would kind of be the indicator there, and I am excited to continue on. Other things to chat about. What have I been watching? We have watched the first 2 seasons of Rings of Power. Now, I actually didn't dislike Rings of Power. The first few episodes of Rings of Power I was enjoying. I was interested in and I was enjoying. Numenor wasn't quite doing it for me, but I kind of had hope that it was going to lead to something. But motivations of the characters are really not very clear. But I really did love Khazad-dûm, and I really do enjoy the elves in the first part. And then it starts to go downhill. And then as soon as you realize who Sauron is, which I realized, I think at least 2 episodes before it is revealed, that's when my issues came in, because then the lack of subtlety and nuance kind of went out the window. It changes Galadriel, it changes Galadriel and Elrond's friendship. The relationship between Elrond and Galadriel is weird in this, because they're kind of flirty with each other, but she should definitely be married with a kid, and he marries her daughter. So it makes it weird, I'm not gonna lie, because like how close they are as friends, like that would be like if my bestie went and married one of my kids. Weird. I don't care that elves live longer, it's weird. So there's that makes it a bit weird. But, you know, if you don't know anything about Tolkien, I suspect that that's still fine. And maybe there are people who are even shipping them. I don't know. And then the second season really didn't work for me. I appreciate that there are a lot of people that actually found that it was a step up. I am not one of those people. I really did like that we started to see more and more of the orcs. That was definitely something that I was really enjoying. And then the people who were kind of like forced to align themselves with the orcs for survival's sake. There are lots of things in there that I do appreciate, but I just think that they were kind of mishandled, and there's just too much going on. Either extend the amount of episodes you're doing per season or iron out your plots, because they've got like 10 different plots going on and none of them are receiving the depth, the attention, or the care that they deserve. Or at least do it in a way that is really innovative and creative, instead of just like teetering on the idea of doing something new. Like, I had the same problem with the second film in the new Star Wars trilogy, is that it nearly did something cool and then reverted back. And that's what the series keeps doing. It nearly does something cool and keeps reverting back. I don't know if I will watch the next season, probably, just because of who I am as a person, but I am displeased. What have I been doing? Well, I'm glad you asked. I have been making Lego Gollum. Ta-da! I made him. He has a ring and a fish. And my son made a hat for him.
It's supposed to be a bubble hat because my son is adorable. And my husband made Frodo, who has a sword and a ring. I think the fish is better, but And then my son made a hat for him as well. It's supposed to be a top hat, but it looks more like a pilgrim hat, which I think is also fabulous. We also got a spare ring with our set. So, for there to be the one ring, we have the one ring 3 times on these 2 dudes. How magnificent is that? There's the Lego Lord of the Rings game, which I tried to play and did not enjoy. It's not really my vibe. I don't like PC gaming. I really don't like playing on computers, so it was never really going to be my thing, but I gave it a shot. The visuals of it are really cool. I kind of wouldn't mind there being some kind of Lord of the Rings Lego movie for some reason. Let me know if there is one. It might be. So that was fun. Consuming all the content still, making things. Actually making Lord of the Rings things was fun. That's where I am at the moment. So I have one more book to go, one more thing to chat to you about, one more check-in, and then I'm done with this vlog. And then you'll miss me. You know you will. Hey vlog, checking in for probably the final time. I'm sure outro me has something to say, but for the final check-in, we have the second half of The Return of the King, the end of the Third Age. We have several things happen in this one. Obviously, we have the conclusion to the actual conflict, including Frodo disposing of the ring in Mount Doom, which plays out slightly differently in the book to in the film. We also have where we have the battle, we have then Aragorn being made king, and we have all of the different endings. So we have the first ending, which is Aragorn being crowned. The second ending, which is the hobbits returning to the Shire. However, it's not like in the film where they return to the Shire and the Shire is unscathed. We see the devastation of the Shire, that people have died, that houses have been destroyed, etc. So the war didn't spare the Shire, and that is actually one of the most devastating things that you can read. We see the end of Green Wormtongue and Sauron. We see how this world has been impacted and then how they rebuild. Then afterwards we have those who are choosing to leave to the Undying Lands. That was also really beautiful, and I really actually like the way that the book did this, because we show how much Sam needs to focus on his family almost as well, but also his unwavering loyalty to Frodo. We see the different endings on how people have ended up. Obviously Aragorn and Arwen marrying. We also have Sam marrying Rosie Cotton, who he'd always had a crush on, and then what happens to the rest of the hobbits, the farewells between Frodo and Merry and Pippin. So many things that I think were just done in a really lovely way. I'm really glad as well that I know the fates of some of these people past this as well. I'm really glad that Tolkien gave us that, the way that he continued to expand upon the lore throughout his lifetime, and obviously Christopher Tolkien continuing that. So I'm really glad that I know what happened even after the many endings. And the thing for me is, a lot of people are this book doesn't end because it keeps ending, and I could have read 10 more endings. It's just done in such an emotional and beautiful way, and I'm so glad that I reread this series because there's such beautiful books. That being said, I have also, of course, watched Return of the King, and I love this film. I mean, there's not a dud film in this entire trilogy. It's such a wonderful trilogy. I think that the depictions of devastation of war were really well done. The way that it
it harms people. I only ever watch the extended edition, and like whenever I think of some of the scenes that are cut, it just makes me so sad. So like Faramir and Eowyn becoming friends and eventually falling in love, that was like, the fact that's cut from the non-director's cut is so sad, because I just think it's such a lovely segment. In the uncut version, I assume you just see Faramir and Eowyn like holding hands or something, and that must be really flipping weird for anyone who's not had that development. There are so many impactful lines, so many wonderful scenes. For Frodo, it is today is not that day. There's so many quotes from there. Don't go where I can't follow. I always love watching these films. They're always such a comfort watch for me anyway. And even when you're watching one of these epic battles and these harrowing scenes, and when you first watch it, you don't know who's going to live or die. We've watched Boromir die. It's not like Tolkien is averse to killing off characters, so it's always important, I think, to kind of see these things and then getting the resolution to everything at the end and the way that it all wraps up, and again, ending upon ending. And I would have happily watched more endings as well. So a wonderful film. And then I have also played Shadow of War, which is the sequel to Shadow of Mordor. This one's an interesting one because you can actually build entire lands of orcs that serve you, but you can't build too many because then they'll start to rebel against you. And it's a really interesting mechanism because it really did build upon the previous one in a really interesting way, without trying to spoil the first game. The way that then the kind of almost corruption arc / grey morality of Talion and Celebrimbor functions is absolutely fantastic. And I kind of would like to, I wish there was a book on Talion and I could get to know even more about this character. And yeah, I had a great time with it, and it really does expand upon things. Like, there are certain elements that I think are potentially lacking, but I don't know if that's like there's a pay to play section that I don't interact with. Yeah, I think it's a really entertaining game, and it definitely has improved certain styles of play, certain mechanisms that you didn't get in the previous game. So I mean, it's well done. I understand, I guess, why there are people who aren't fussed about this one, because there are so many things that aren't particularly new. It is just kind of certain mechanics of the game, and then also certain new plot elements that make it interesting. But you're not missing loads if you've not played the second one, but it's a fun addition if you liked the first one and want to continue playing more. But that is it. That is all of the things I have to chat about. So cue outro me. Hopefully she has something interesting to say to you. That is it for this final segment. And we have now come full circle, and we are back at the start, and it is time to finish up this vlog. I have had such a wonderful time reading this series and getting re-immersed into this world and being able to do so many things. I'm so glad that the fandom just keeps expanding, be it through cinema, through video games, through games. I am hoping to potentially read maybe like a weekend reading vlog here or there to add to this. I know that the Tales from the Shire video game is supposed to be coming out sometime this year, so hopefully I'll get my hands on that. Maybe read the Silmarillion or something. I'm having a wonderful time reading through this world, and hopefully I can add to this vlog series eventually, but I wanted to get the core books all in one video, and I might as well talk about as much media as I can while doing so, in case you guys also want to immerse yourselves into Middle-earth. But that is all from me for this vlog. I can't say for today because this is definitely not a today vlog, but thank you ever so much for watching, and let me know how you like to immerse yourself in different fandoms and how it makes you feel. I'll hopefully catch you in another one soon.